Felicitous greetings, fellow fanatics. And Taro Adun, brave warriors. For the past 5 years, I've had the chance to share some amazing board games and video games with you, and some not so amazing. Today, to celebrate my channel's 5th anniversary, we're going to be taking a look at the first deck builder ever made, yes, even before Dominion, StarCraft the Board Game by Fantasy Flight Games, along with its expansions. This video will have the full details for all the expansions included. When you see this Hydralisk icon in the corner of the screen, that means it specifically pertains to the Brood War expansion. If you're just playing with the base game, feel free to ignore those parts. Without any further ado, let's dive in! Based off the 1998 video game of the same name, in StarCraft you'll take on the role of one of 3 races: the resourceful human refugees known as the Terrans, the monstrous hordes known as the Zerg, or the stalwart warriors known as the Protoss. 2 to 6 players will battle for control of resources over the course of 3 stages, with victory coming to the player that has the greatest number of conquest points when one of 2 endgame conditions is met. When either the 15 conquest point threshold is passed, or when the second the End Draws Near card is revealed, the game will end. Alternatively, each faction also has its own unique victory condition that they can pursue, or you can simply try to eliminate your foes entirely. To set up, start by randomly choosing a player to go first and have them take the first player marker. Then, starting with the first player and going clockwise, each player chooses one of 6 factions: Jim Raynor or Arcturus Mengs of the Terrans, Kerrigan or the Overmind of the Zerg, or Aldaris or Tassadar of the Protoss. Each player will need to gather the components pertaining to their respective faction. This includes their miniatures, combat deck, technology deck, order tokens, bases, workers, buildings, and modules. If you're playing with the expansion, make sure that you use the new version of your faction sheet and remove the base game version of any duplicate cards in the combat and technology decks, as well as any building tokens for the Terran or Protoss. Place your building tokens face down so that you can see the level and resource cost of each, placing them in stacks with the highest level on bottom and the lowest level on top. Note that there is no token for level 1 of your basic building, as players will always start the game with it pre-built, as shown on their faction sheet. Each player should also take their point tracker and place it on the 0 space on the conquest point track. Next, you need to set up the event deck, which acts as a timer of sorts for the game. First, separate the event deck into 3 stages, denoted by the different backs on the cards, and shuffle each stage individually. Then, secretly remove a number of cards from both the Stage 1 and Stage 2 decks depending on the number of players and whether or not you're playing with the expansion. So for example, I recently did a 4-player game with the expansion, so I removed 11 cards from both the Stage 1 and Stage 2 decks. Then, stack the 3 decks so that the Stage 3 deck is on the bottom and the Stage 1 deck is on the top. If playing with the expansion, everyone will choose their Stage 1 leadership cards. You have 7 leadership cards in total, with 3 to choose from at the beginning of the game. This will determine your starting forces and gives you a unique bonus. So for example, the Overmind can choose between Endless Hunger, the Swarm, or the eponymous Overmind card. If he chooses Endless Hunger, he'll begin the game with 1 Zergling, 2 Hydralisk, and 9 workers, and you will always start with exactly 1 transport. Plus, he'll be able to slide this card under his faction sheet to give him 1 extra mineral and gas as permanent resources. If he chooses the Swarm, he'll start with 4 Zerglings, 1 Hydralisk, and 8 workers. Plus, when the game reaches Stage 3, he can then win by having a base on 3 different planets at the end of a round. And if he chooses the Overmind, he'll start with 3 Zerglings, 2 Hydralisk, and 7 workers. He'll also take an installation token representing his namesake and place it on his starting planet. But bear in mind that installations cannot be placed in the same space as a base. As long as he controls this token, he'll gain 1 conquest point at the end of each round, but if it's destroyed, it's gone for good. Generally speaking, this is how most Stage 1 cards are divided, with an economic boon on one, your unique victory condition on another, and the last one having stronger starting forces. Now you'll move on to set up the galaxy. Take all the planet tokens and shuffle them up, then have each player draw 2. Each player should then take the matching planets. You will not need the planet tokens for the rest of the game. Starting with the first player and going clockwise, each player will place 1 planet. The placement of the first planet should be in the center, and after placing it, that player has the option of placing their base on that planet, or they can wait until they place their other planet and do so there. If playing with the expansion, note that bases cannot be built on areas that represent space, which are represented by black circles. More on that in a moment. Each planet thereafter must connect to at least one other planet that has already been placed, but may otherwise be placed and oriented in any position that the player placing it wishes. If a planet is placed in a way where it's possible to connect to 2 or more planets in its orientation, then it must do so, but it does not have to be oriented in such a manner. After every player has placed one planet, they then place their other planet in reverse order, meaning that the player that placed their planet last in the first round will place both of theirs consecutively. Any player that didn't place a base during the first round of placement must place it on their second planet. After all planets have been placed, each player should take a pair of matching Z-axis routes. Starting with the first player and going clockwise, they'll place these on 2 planets to represent a route between them. The same pair of planets may be connected by multiple routes this way, but a single route may never start and end on the same planet. Depending on the map setup, you may find it impossible to place enough for all players. In such a case, just keep going until it's impossible to do so and simply return the rest to the box. Next, take the resource cards for all planets in the game. If a player is on the planet in question, give those resource cards to that player. Otherwise, keep it nearby the planet in question. Finally, have each player place their starting forces. If playing with the base game, these are listed on the back of your faction sheet. Otherwise, these will be indicated on your Stage 1 leadership card. These units may be divided among different areas of your starting planet, respecting unit limits. Each space has 2 to 4 circles representing how many units that space can hold. Bases and installations do not count against this limit. If playing with the expansion, you'll notice that not all these spaces are yellow circles. Brown circles represent underground terrain, which can only be navigated by ground units, while black circles represent space and can only be navigated by flying units. Though do note that you will never start with a flying unit, so no unit should be on spaces with black circles at the beginning of the game. Make sure that token supplies are within reach. For the base game, this will only include depletion markers, but if playing with the expansion, you'll also have guard and resource tokens. Players should then check their decks to make sure that their technology and combat decks are separated. Shuffle up your combat deck, then draw 6 cards to start, or 8 if you're playing as Terran. And with that, you're ready to begin. Round structure in StarCraft is divided into 3 phases: planning, execution, and regrouping. During the planning phase, starting with the first player and moving clockwise, players will place 1 order at a time until everyone has placed 4 order markers on the board. We'll go over the details of what each order does when we get to the execution phase, but know that each player has the same 9 order tokens. You have 2 copies each of the standard build, research, and mobilize orders, plus 1 copy each of a special order for each of them, denoted by a gold coloration. If playing with the expansion, you'll also have a round order token for the defend order. More on that in a little bit. When placing an order, you may choose any planet that you have either a base or units on, or a planet that is adjacent to one such planet. You may place an order even if you cannot resolve it, but be warned that this means your plans may be disrupted. A single planet may have any number of tokens placed upon it, and they will be placed from bottom to top. As a rule of thumb, tokens placed first will be resolved last, so you'll need to try and think backwards in order to play effectively. After everyone has placed 4 order tokens, you'll move on to the execution phase, wherein players will resolve orders one at a time. The first player begins by choosing any one order token that they have on top of an order stack to reveal and resolve. This will progress clockwise until all order tokens on the board have been resolved. When a player reveals any order token, if they are unable or unwilling to go through with the action upon it, they may instead opt to discard the token and draw 1 event card. Whenever you draw an event card, do not look at it. Instead, keep it face down for use during the regrouping phase. If a player's turn comes and they have order tokens on the board, but none of them are on top of a stack, then they will draw an event card and skip their turn. They will still eventually get to resolve all of their placed order tokens. If a player's turn comes and they have no order tokens remaining, then their turn is simply skipped without drawing an event card. When you resolve a build order, you can train units, upgrade your bases, or construct a new one. There are 3 separate steps involved that must be done in order. Firstly, if there is a base on that planet, you may build workers, transports, and units. Workers and transports can be purchased in any quantity that you can afford. Units have a build limit. At the start of the game, your build limit is 2. The Terran and Protoss can build supply modules. More on that in a little bit. For the Zerg, their build limit is equal to 2 times the number of buildings they currently have. They start with a spawning pool and can have a build limit of up to 6 if they construct a Queen's Nest and a Spire. To pay resource costs, move a number of workers from your worker pool to resources of the appropriate type. Bear in mind that every player has 4 minerals and 2 gas on their faction sheet as permanent resources. You'll generally want to spend these before using resources on planet cards, as workers here will not be vulnerable to enemy attacks. You cannot go above the limit listed on a permanent resource, but planetary resources may be exceeded by 1. When you do so, you deplete that resource. The first time this happens, you'll flip that resource card and place a depletion marker in the appropriate space to represent this. If this happens to a space that has already been depleted once, you'll flip the depletion marker to the red side and remove the resource card. No player can harvest that space for the rest of the game. If playing with the expansion, you might also gain resource tokens throughout the game. If you have these, you may discard them at any time to spend them without expending a worker. The cost for workers and transports is always 1 mineral each. When you place workers, immediately place them into your unavailable worker space on your faction sheet. When you purchase a transport, place it on one of the space routes connecting to that planet. Bear in mind that each route may only have 1 transport per player, and that Z-axis routes are treated the same as routes that are physically connected. When building units, their costs will be listed on the faction sheet. In this example, the Zerg player can build Zerglings for 1 mineral each, or Hydralisk for 1 mineral and 1 gas. A player may build any combination of units so long as they can pay for the resources and do not go over the build limit. On that note, you may voluntarily destroy your own units at any time during your turn except when in combat. After you're finished with workers, transports, and units, if any, then if you have a base or units on the planet where the order is resolved, you may construct up to 1 building in 1 module. To construct a building, pay the cost on the back of its tile, then place it on the appropriate slot on your board. This will show what new units you can construct with future build orders. You may either construct a brand new building or upgrade an existing one, but not both. Likewise, modules have their price shown on the back of their token, but may be built in any order. However, they are limited by the module slots on your faction sheet. We'll cover the specifics of modules later on. Finally, if you have a unit on the planet but no base there, you may spend 2 minerals to construct a new base. When you resolve a research order, you'll always begin by drawing an event card. Remember, do not look at it yet. After that, you may draw 3 cards from your combat deck and add them to your hand. Then, you may purchase 1 technology from the technology deck. When you purchase a technology, the cost is listed in the bottom left and bottom right corners of the card. Additionally, you'll see 1 to 3 dots in the center of the card. This shows how many copies there are of that technology. When you purchase a tech, take all copies of that card and shuffle them and your discard pile into your combat deck. Alternatively, some cards will instruct you to put the card into your play area. These are never placed into your deck and should instead be kept visible for all players to see. The Mobilize order is how you move and attack in the game. When you resolve a Mobilize order, you are moving to the planet in question. This may involve moving units that are already on the planet and moving from any number of neighboring planets that currently have transports connecting them. You may move into any number of friendly or empty areas on the planet and can also move into a single enemy controlled area. This will start a battle, which I'll explain in detail near the end, as it'll make more sense once you understand everything that surrounds it. When starting a battle, you may exceed the unit limit of the space you're attacking by 2. This encourages players to attack early and often, as the attacker will often have the advantage. As aforementioned, each of the 3 main orders also has an enhanced version called a special order. To place these in the base game, you must have an equal or greater number of research modules built before the planning phase. This means that in the base game, no one will be able to place special orders in the first planning phase. In the expansion, you'll be able to place them at will. When a special order is revealed, you must have sufficient research modules built in order to resolve it, and you'll then place it into your special order pool if it's resolved. As with other orders, you may choose to discard it and draw an event card if you are unable or unwilling to resolve it. Additionally, the expansion introduces strategic areas. If you control one of these spaces, you may treat all orders on that planet as though they are special orders, and no tokens from that planet are placed into your special order pool, even if they actually are special order tokens, effectively giving you unlimited special orders on that planet. When activating a special build order, your unit build limit is increased by 1, and you can take a 1 resource discount on a single purchase during the order, either 1 mineral or gas. When resolving a special research order, you may either draw an extra event card, or when researching a new technology, you may take 1 copy of it directly into your hand. Any remaining copies are shuffled into your deck as usual. When executing a special Mobilize order, you'll gain 2 advantages if you start a battle with it, allowing you to draw 2 extra cards at the start of the fight and giving all of your units +1 attack for the battle. More on that when we get to combat. If playing with the expansion, you'll also have the Defend order. This is a special order as it's not actually resolved during the execution phase, but rather activates immediately during the planning phase. To do so, you choose one friendly area on any planet. You may then immediately move units into that space, and only that space, as though you were activating a Mobilize order. Additionally, place a guard token into that same space. If a space with a guard token is attacked, the defending player may discard it to have all units gain 2 health for that battle. But be aware that this bonus doesn't stack with anything else. After you use your Defend order token, flip it face down to show it's been used. You may only use your Defend order once per round. After all orders have been revealed, it's time to move on to the regrouping phase. First, you'll check to see if any bases and installations are destroyed. Any which are in the same space as enemy units at this point will be destroyed and returned to their player's reserve. Next, check transports and make sure that at least one of the planets they're adjacent to has a friendly base. If no friendly base is on either planet, that transport is destroyed. After that, you'll check to see if players lose resource cards. If a player no longer has a base on a planet, they lose all resource cards from that planet. Alternatively, if enemy units are on a specific space on a planet, you also lose that card. If any workers are on a resource card when you lose it, those workers are destroyed and returned to your reserve. Then, players may gain resource cards. If you are the only player with a base on a given planet, gain cards for any areas except those for spaces with enemy units on them. If more than one player has a base on a planet, those players gain cards for any areas they currently control with a base or units. Next, you retrieve workers, returning all them from resource cards and your unavailable workers pile to your worker pool. If playing with the expansion, you'll now check to see if it's time for players to choose leadership cards. If the top card of the event deck is Stage 2, you'll choose the appropriate leadership cards if you haven't done so already, with each player choosing one and then revealing it simultaneously. You'll then do the same for Stage 3 when the top card of the event deck shows the Stage 3 back. Each stage of event cards introduces powerful new abilities, including heroes, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Next, players will gain conquest points. Some spaces are worth 1 or even 2 CP each. After that, you'll check to see if anyone has won a normal victory. If any player has 15 or more conquest points, then the player with the most CP wins. If no one has won a normal victory and you're in Stage 3, then you'll check to see if anyone has achieved their special victory condition. Assuming the game hasn't ended from either of those victory triggers, everyone will look at their event cards and choose one card to play. They'll choose simultaneously, then reveal and resolve them in order, starting with the first player and going clockwise. Event cards can do a wide variety of things, including giving long-term strategic benefits, modifying Z-axis routes, or giving free reinforcements, just to name a few. And of course, it should be noted that there are 3 The End Draws Near cards in the third stage of the event deck. When 2 or more of these are played, the game ends after the play event card step is resolved. Next, all players must check the number of cards in their hand and discard down to their starting hand size. This will normally mean discarding down to 6 or 8 for Terran players. Finally, the first player token is passed clockwise and a new round begins. Of course, it wouldn't be StarCraft without combat. When combat begins, place the Mobilize order in the space with the battle to remind players where they're fighting. Then, use any start of combat abilities immediately. In this example, the Protoss player has leg enhancements and attacks with 3 Zealots and a Dragoon, so the defender must destroy a ground unit that costs 2 or less resources. In this case, they destroy one of their Zerglings. After that, the attacker draws 3 cards and the defender draws 1, although it should be noted that Protoss are able to draw 2 extra cards on defense, meaning they'll normally draw 3 cards regardless. Next, the attacker assigns skirmishes. When assigning skirmishes, they must make as many one-on-one matchups as possible, in this case, 2. Bear in mind that assist units never form skirmishes, more on that in the next example. They assign a Zealot to fight the Zergling and another to fight the Hydralisk. After that, if either player has units not assigned to skirmishes, they assign them as supporting units. Be sure to set supporting units back a bit so you can clearly tell which one is the frontline unit. After that, the attacker sets combat cards. There are 2 types of combat cards: Standard, which have numbers in the upper corners, and Reinforcement cards, which have a plus symbol in the top center of the card. You must play exactly 1 standard card to each skirmish. You may optionally play 1 reinforcement card to each. When playing your standard card, you may play it from your hand or play blindly from the top of your deck. But if you play a card from your deck this way, you cannot add a reinforcement. Once the attacker has placed their cards, the defender does the same. After that, both players reveal their cards simultaneously. In this case, Kerrigan played a card blindly and drew a reinforcement card. She'll discard it immediately and replace it with the next card from the top of her deck, repeating this if necessary until it's a standard combat card. Now we compare values. Each standard card has attack values in the top right and health values in the top left. If the frontline unit matches one of the units on the card, then you'll use the larger outer numbers, which are called major values. If the unit does not match, then you'll use the smaller inner numbers known as minor values. Typically speaking, major values will be higher than minor values, but this rule isn't entirely ironclad. In this skirmish, the Zealot has 5 attack, plus 1 for the Dragoon supporting, plus 1 more for Singularity Charge. This symbol means that either the front line or a supporting unit can match the reinforcement card. This means that the Zealot has a total of 7 attack versus the Hydralisk's 6 health, so the Hydralisk will die. However, attacks are carried out simultaneously. The Hydralisk has 7 attack versus the 6 health Zealot, meaning the Zealot will also die. The other skirmish is simpler. The Zergling has 3 Thorp and will die to the Zealot's 7-5, which is boosted to 8-5 because of the supporting Zealot. When you have supporting units, be sure to check your faction sheet to see how much they add to the battle. So the Zergling and the Hydralisk die along with the Zealot. Since all defending units were destroyed, the Protoss units will remain in that space. That's a fairly simple example of the sort of battle that you can expect to see in the early game, but there's some more things you should be aware of. So let's jump ahead to a battle in the mid game for a second example. In this case, we have 4 skirmishes set up as the Overmind player has attacked Mengsk in hope of destroying his base on Halcyon. Note that Mengsk has the assist module, which lets him keep the medic there beyond the usual unit limit. In the first skirmish, the Zergling burrows, and since there's no detectors in this skirmish, it will be protected from the Marine's attack. However, with an attack of 0, the Marine obviously isn't dying either, although it means that their bunker card is pretty much wasted. In the next skirmish, the Marine has 5 attack versus the Zergling's 3 health, so the Zergling will die. A medic is assisting the Marine. Assist units may never be a frontline unit, but can provide powerful support abilities. In this case, she boosts the Marine's health by 2, bringing him up to 7 and allowing him to survive the Zergling's attack. Now things get a bit more complicated as we have a Mutalisk and a Zergling against a Firebat. With 8 attack total, the Mutalisk handily takes out the stimmed Firebat, who only has 3 health. The Firebat's 7 attack is sufficient to take out the 7 health Mutalisk, but if you're familiar with the video game, you already know that doesn't work. Firebats can't attack flying units, and this is reflected on the faction sheet where it shows that Firebats can only attack ground units. Because there's a supporting unit in the skirmish that can be destroyed, that unit will be destroyed by the Firebat instead. After that, the 7-6 Hydralisk has +1 attack from the Zergling and +1 health from the reinforcement card. Meanwhile, the 6-5 Vulture has +1 health from the repair card, which costs a worker to use, but isn't enough to save the Vulture. Additionally, the Mutalisk has splash damage and destroys an extra Marine as a result. More on that in a moment. The Zerg player did a lot of damage. If the Overmind had destroyed the last Marine, he would have been victorious. But as long as any non-assist units remain, the defender is successful, and the attacker must retreat. To retreat, a player must choose a single friendly or empty area on the same planet, or one that can be reached via transport. Unfortunately for the Zerg player, none of the available spaces on Dylar 4 or Halcyon have sufficient room for their surviving forces, so they must choose a space to retreat to, and then choose one unit to immediately destroy so that the remaining forces can respect the unit limit. There are too many different units to go over everything that you can expect in battle. The good news is that if you're familiar with the video game, you'll find that most of the abilities you're already familiar with are represented in the board game, though naturally, some concessions do have to be made. Want to call down a nuclear strike with a ghost? You can do that.
Call the shot.
Want to fuse 2 High Templar into an Archon? You can do that too.
Power overwhelming.
Want to infest a command center and pump out infested Terrans? You can do that, but you need the expansion for it. While it's impossible to cover everything, let's go over some common abilities you'll encounter. Firstly, let's take a look at splash damage since I mentioned it in the recent combat example. When a unit has splash damage, then if it destroys an enemy unit, the player that controls the destroyed unit must choose an eligible surviving unit to destroy from the battle. This can include supporting or assist units. Next, we have Cloak. Some units can gain this through combat cards, and if playing with the expansion, then Lurkers and Dark Templar are always cloaked. If a unit is cloaked, then it is not destroyed in battle, although splash damage will still trigger if there's enough damage that it would otherwise destroy them. Which brings us to Detector. Again, some combat cards will give you Detector, while the Queen and Science Vessel will automatically grant Detector to any skirmish they partake in. When a unit has Detector, it negates cloaking for all enemy units in the same skirmish. If playing as the Zerg, you may end up using the Sacrifice ability. These units tend to have very powerful attacks, but are automatically destroyed at the end of battle if they're capable of attacking their target. And finally, if playing with the expansion, you'll have some units with the Collateral Damage ability. If a unit with this ability survives the battle, then the controlling player may immediately destroy an enemy base, an enemy installation, or all enemy workers in the space where the battle took place. If playing with the expansion, then you may notice that every faction's Stage 2 leadership cards has at least one hero. Heroes represent enhanced units that are stronger than their ordinary counterparts in some way. Each has unique abilities, such as Raynor, who gives +1 attack to all skirmishes when he's in battle, Zeratul, who destroys a unit before the battle begins, or the Tarask that revives for free during each regrouping phase. Every hero has unique abilities, but they are all immune to being destroyed by any means other than combat damage. This means they can't be destroyed by splash damage, abilities, event cards, nor can they be mind controlled by Dark Archons. Now let's take a look at each of the different types of modules. First, we have supply modules. For each of these you possess, your unit build limit is increased by 2. Because of the unique way Zerg build limits work, they do not build supply modules. Next, we have the research module. For every research module you control, you can use one special order per round as discussed beforehand. Then we have the air support module. This gives you 3 abilities while defending any of your bases. You gain 1 attack against all air units, you can detect cloaked units, and attacks cannot come from off-world, meaning that enemies must first land elsewhere on the planet before attempting to assault your bases. If playing with the expansion, you'll have 3 additional modules. If you have a defensive module, then when defending in a battle, you may switch the position of 2 of your units after skirmishes have been formed, but you must ensure that your opponent is able to attack any frontline units you choose with this switch. The assist module allows you to have a single assist unit on each space without counting towards unit limits. And finally, the offensive module allows you to directly attack a base with an air support module, but you must sacrifice your own transport when doing so. The game will continue until one of 4 end conditions is met. If all players except one are eliminated, then that player immediately wins regardless of other factors. However, this is pretty rare in practice outside of 2-player games. The other 3 ways the game can end happen strictly during the regrouping phase. If any player has 15 or more conquest points, then the player with the highest CP will claim victory. If the game is in Stage 3, then players can win by their unique victory conditions. And if 2 or more of the end draws near cards are played, then the game will end at the end of the event card step with the player with the most conquest points claiming victory. With any of these 3 victory conditions, if players are tied, then you'll check the following in order to see who wins among the tied players. Whoever has the most conquest points, whomever controls the most resources, whomever controls the most areas on the board, whoever has the most bases on the board, and finally, whomever has the most workers in their worker pool. If anyone is still tied after that, the tied players claim a shared victory. And those are the basic rules for how to play. The instructions also include rules for how to play with Conquest mode or with team play. Additionally, the expansion explains how to play with either randomized factions or with survival mode. There were 3 official expansions to the game: the aforementioned Brood War full expansion, the Typhon promo, and the UED print and play expansion. We've gone over most of the details of Brood War already, but it should also be noted that this expansion introduced 8 new unit types. The 7 that were introduced in the video game expansion of the same name, plus the Infested Terrans for the Zerg, which were not in the base game of the board game. Brood War also includes a handful of scenarios with pre-made setups and special rules to play by. The Typhon promo introduces a new planet to the game with only a single connection point. To use it, simply shuffle a planet token in with the rest during setup, and that's it. And finally, we have the UED print and play mini expansion. These 7 leadership cards add a 3rd faction for the Terrans to play as, and may be chosen during setup in place of selecting another Terran faction. Onto component quality, the first thing of course is the miniatures. The base game includes a whopping 180 of them, and the expansion adds an impressive 48. All these are wonderfully detailed to showcase almost every unit from the video game, with the exception of workers, transports, and observers. Most units come with 3 copies each, while Marines, Hydralisks, and Zealots have 6, and Zerglings have 9. Flying units have clear stands, and it should be noted that both the Zerglings and the Scourges are represented by 2 sculpts per mini. I tried upgrading the Battlecruiser minis, but no one at my table seemed to like that idea. Next, we have the cards. These are your standard American card game size and have a textured finish. They're clear and show what they need to, though honestly, the wireframe artwork doesn't look that great. Obviously, they did something similar for the video game's status screen, but I feel like full art or even just standard sprites from the game would have done the job much better. Faction boards are made of standard cardstock, while everything else is made of cardboard of decent thickness. You may have noticed that I didn't physically connect any of the map pieces in this review. That's because the way they interlock is a little tight, and I'm afraid that actually connecting them will damage them over time, so I've avoided it with my copy. I do feel I should briefly criticize the iconography for ground and air units, as well as which ones can attack which. If you're like me and intimately familiar with the video game, then you'll have no problem remembering which ones are able to do what. But for players unfamiliar with the video game, the icons are rather vague, and since it is a fantasy flight game, there's no real insert to speak of. I found a suggestion on Board Game Geek to use 6 tackle boxes, and they stack in very nicely. I did have to modify things a bit since the inside dimensions changed slightly, but all the same, the solution works great, makes it very easy for players to find the pieces that they need. All in all, StarCraft the Board Game is an amazing adaptation. Whereas Warcraft the Board Game took Warcraft 3 and recreated it at a macro scale, StarCraft instead takes the opposite approach. While the flow of the galactic map feels wildly different from the video game, they instead took each individual unit, that's 33 if you count the expansion, and recreated all of their abilities in the game. It is an unparalleled level of dedication and attention to detail. My only real complaint is that theme-wise, the choice of planets is a little odd. Most of them are pretty minor worlds in the story. Sure, you do have Tarsonis and Chowsara, but you don't have Ire, you don't have Char, you don't have Korhal, and you don't have Shakuras. And obviously, getting the game to the table is a major undertaking. It's not for the faint of heart, nor the short of attention span. But if you can get it to the table, it is an absolute blast. It is rather hard to find at a reasonable price these days, but there's a reason it's a grail game for many players. And the Brood War expansion does a great job of fleshing out unique abilities for each faction. That being said, I really don't recommend picking up the Typhon promo. It is not worth the time and effort. Regardless, this is a masterpiece and will remain the crown jewel of my collection for the foreseeable future. In conclusion, I find StarCraft the Board Game and its expansions to be worthy of an impressive 9.6 out of 10. I normally don't suggest fan-made mods for Tabletop Simulator, but considering the game is long out of print and that's unlikely to change anytime soon, I'm going to make an exception here. It's currently the most reasonable way to play it, and considering its price these days, it's definitely one you should try before you attempt to buy it. Be sure to give it a go if you get the chance. If you're interested in purchasing StarCraft the Board Game, good luck. Seriously, that's all the advice I can give this time.
Good luck. You're gonna need it.
If you're interested in playing via Tabletop Simulator or learning more, links are included in the description. But what about you? What do you think of StarCraft the Board Game? What Grail games are in your collection? If you have any questions, remarks, or opposing points of view, leave them in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. If you really enjoy my work, please consider funding my channel on Patreon. Until next time, farewell, fellow fanatics. Thank you again for watching. I have plenty more to share with you if you're interested. You can click up here above my head to subscribe to my channel. You can click over here on my monitor to see the most recent video that I've worked on. Or if you prefer, you can click up here to open this mysterious vault and see what video that the YouTube algorithm has picked just for you.